The sound of tires screeching on the asphalt tore through the relative tranquility of that Sunday afternoon in Boston, followed by the sharp, painful howl of an injured animal. Before we continue this touching story, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Richard Mason, 67 years old, sitting behind the wheel of his worn yellow taxi on what should have been his weekly day off, witnessed the exact moment when a golden retriever was hit by a black SUV that ran through a red light at the corner of Commonwealth Avenue. The dog's owner, who was almost hit himself, jumped back at the last instant. Richard's wrinkled hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white as he watched the man run toward the fallen animal, shouting accusations at the SUV driver, who was now irritably getting out of his vehicle, holding his cell phone as if nothing had happened. The late afternoon sun cast elongated shadows over the scene, a golden glow that contradicted the sadness now unfolding on the hot asphalt. Richard shouldn't get involved. His extra shift would end in an hour, and Margaret, his wife of 43 years, was waiting at home for the medications he needed to buy at the discount pharmacy before she fell asleep, exhausted after another chemotherapy session at Eastside Community Hospital, a place where the corridors were always crowded, the equipment outdated, and the overworked doctors barely had time to look patients in the eye. But it was what their basic health insurance covered, and even then the medical bills had already consumed almost all of their savings. Margaret's recent medication change, which Dr. Phillips had prescribed after her last crisis, cost 3 times more than the previous one, forcing Richard to give up his Sundays of rest. The cost. It was always the cost. Tens of thousands of dollars they simply didn't have. The modest retirement that Richard received after decades as a taxi driver barely covered the rent, forcing him to continue driving his taxi even at 67 years old. And yet, even working 7 days a week, they could barely afford the basic medications that insurance didn't cover. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the sound of the intensifying argument outside and the low, constant crying of the injured dog. When he opened them again, he was already turning off the engine and getting out of the taxi. "It wasn't my fault. I was taking an important call, and the dog appeared out of nowhere." The SUV driver, a man in an expensive suit with an irritated expression, was gesticulating frantically, still holding his cell phone. "You ran a red light, everyone saw it." The dog's owner, a man of approximately 38 years, was crouched beside the animal, trying to calm it while yelling at the driver. The golden retriever was shaking violently, a red stain spreading across its golden fur. "What matters now is the dog," interrupted Richard, his voice hoarse but firm, accustomed to navigating the streets of Boston for 4 decades. "He needs a vet, and fast." Both men looked at Richard, momentarily silenced by the unexpected intervention. The elderly taxi driver didn't wait for a response. He crouched down with difficulty, his knees protesting after hours at the wheel, and observed the animal. "Can he move?" "I don't know," James responded, his voice now breaking. "Buddy is my best friend. My wife will be devastated." Richard nodded, a knot forming in his throat. He thought again of Margaret, of how destroyed he would be when He pushed the thought away. "My taxi is over there. I can take you to the veterinary clinic." "But he's bleeding," James hesitated. "And I've carried worse things than blood on that back seat," Richard replied, surprising himself with the offer. The taxi's upholstery was one of the few things he kept immaculate. "His life is worth more than my upholstery." As Richard and James carefully lifted the injured golden retriever, the SUV driver, realizing the gravity of the situation, changed his tone. "Look, I'm sorry about the dog. I can pay for the vet," he said, now visibly disturbed, extending a business card to James.
Subscribe.
James, with his face tense with worry, took his cell phone from his pocket with his free hand and quickly photographed the SUV's license plate and the driver's face. "We'll resolve this later. Now I need to save my dog," he declared firmly, putting the card in his pocket. "And don't worry, your insurance company will hear about this." The man in the suit paled, mumbling something about following in his own car, but James had already turned his full attention to Buddy, who was whimpering in pain as he was placed on the back seat of the taxi, immediately staining the beige vinyl with bright red blood. "Maine Veterinary Hospital on Charles Street," James told Richard, quickly entering the taxi. Richard knew the place. It was the most expensive and exclusive veterinary clinic in Boston, with its mirrored glass facade and parking lot full of luxury cars. A place where pets received treatment that many people, like Margaret, could only dream of. Richard automatically turned on the taximeter, a mechanical gesture after so many years, but immediately turned it off again. "Don't worry about that now," he said, accelerating and merging into the afternoon traffic. As he drove, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror to see James stroking the dog's head and whispering words of comfort, Richard couldn't help but think of Margaret. She always wanted a dog, a golden retriever exactly like this one, but the life of a taxi driver never allowed enough time to properly care for a pet, and now time was slipping through his fingers like fine sand. "My name is James Fletcher," he said, breaking the tense silence inside the taxi. "I don't know how to thank you for this." "Richard Mason," the taxi driver responded, turning down a side street that only local drivers knew about to avoid a section with construction. "And you don't need to thank me. Anyone would do the same." But they both knew that wasn't true, not in this city, not in this day and age. "I should call my wife," James said, taking his cell phone from his pocket with trembling hands. "She's an oncologist at Boston Memorial Research Center. She's on call today, but she needs to know about Buddy." Richard felt a tightness in his chest upon hearing the name of the hospital. The Boston Memorial Research Center was an elite institution where only private patients and those with premium insurance were treated. The same hospital where Margaret's doctor had suggested transferring her if they had the $50,000 for the initial treatment, a world completely inaccessible to them. 15 minutes later, thanks to Richard's knowledge of shortcuts through the city, they parked in front of the veterinary clinic. James jumped out of the car, and together they carried the injured dog, who now seemed calmer, perhaps dangerously so, into the establishment. The clinic's reception was stunning: polished marble floors, soft lighting, relaxing ambient music, and the subtle aroma of lavender in the air, a stark contrast to the crowded corridors and the smell of cheap disinfectant at Eastside Community Hospital. A team of 3 professionals in perfectly white coats quickly took care of the animal, taking it to an emergency room. James ran after the veterinarians, still on the phone, loudly and tensely explaining the situation to whom Richard presumed was his wife. He didn't even look back, completely absorbed by his pet's emergency. Richard remained near the door, feeling out of place in that luxurious environment, where even the ornamental plants seemed better cared for than many patients at Margaret's hospital. "Did you bring the golden retriever?" asked the receptionist, looking at him with slight surprise as she noticed his blood-stained taxi driver uniform. "Yes, but I'm not the owner," Richard replied, feeling increasingly out of place. "I just brought them." "Oh, I see," she said, turning her attention back to the computer, already dismissing him as irrelevant. Richard hesitated for a moment, looking in the direction where James had disappeared along with the veterinarians and the dog. No one would notice if he simply left now. And Margaret was waiting for the medications. Without saying anything more, he turned around and left the clinic, his throat tight as he thought about the contrast between that place and the hospital where his wife was receiving treatment. Back at the taxi, Richard felt strangely empty. The back seat was soaked with blood, something that would take hours to clean. He would have to cancel his next rides. He thought of Margaret, of the medicines he needed to buy, of the contrast between that luxurious veterinary clinic and the decaying public hospital where his wife was fighting for her life. Why did a dog deserve better treatment than a human being? The bitter thought accompanied him as he drove to the car wash where Ernesto, a middle-aged Dominican, had been helping him for years to keep the taxi presentable. When he arrived, he explained the situation and asked for an urgent cleaning. "Dog blood? We'll need special products, Mr. Mason," said Ernesto, examining the damage. "It will take at least an hour." Richard nodded, resigned. He would lose the entire afternoon of work. While Ernesto and his helpers worked on the taxi, Richard took the opportunity to go to the nearby pharmacy and buy Margaret's medicines. When he returned, Ernesto was waiting for him with something in his hands. "We found this under the seat, Mr. Mason," he said, handing over an elegant brown leather wallet, visibly expensive. Richard took the wallet, feeling its substantial weight. "Thank you, Ernesto. It must belong to the passenger I helped earlier." "There was a lot of money in there," Ernesto commented casually. "My nephew wanted to keep quiet about it, but I told him that's not how we do things." Richard looked at the man with new respect. "I appreciate your honesty, Ernesto. Truly." Ernesto shrugged. "You've always been fair with me. And besides," he smiled, "I need to sleep well at night, don't I?" Richard paid for the cleaning, adding a generous tip that he really couldn't afford, but that Ernesto and his nephew truly deserved. Back at the wheel, Richard examined the wallet. The name on the credit card confirmed it. James Fletcher. There were photos too. James with a beautiful woman in a white coat in front of a sophisticated building that Richard recognized as the Boston Memorial Research Center, probably his wife. James with a healthy and happy golden retriever in a park. And there was money, quite a lot of money. $100 bills organized in an elegant golden money clip. Richard quickly closed the wallet, combating the fleeting thought of how much that money would help with Margaret's medical bills. He sent another message to his wife. "I'll be a little late. Need to return something important to someone." After a few minutes of contemplation, Richard started the taxi and returned to the veterinary clinic. It was almost 5 in the afternoon when he parked again in front of the modern establishment. He imagined that the dog would already be in surgery, and perhaps James would be calmer now. When he entered the clinic a few hours later, the scene was different from the one he had left. The reception was calmer. He approached the counter, hesitant. "Good afternoon. I've come to return a wallet that was forgotten in my taxi. It belongs to a man who brought in an injured golden retriever earlier today, Mr. Fletcher." The receptionist looked at him with more attention this time. "Ah, yes. Mr. Fletcher is in the waiting room. The dog is in surgery. You can give it directly to him, 3rd door on the right." Richard followed the corridor, feeling like an intruder in that sophisticated environment. When he found the indicated room, he saw James sitting in one of the leather armchairs, his head in his hands. Next to him, consoling him, was an elegant woman of approximately 65 years, wearing a cashmere ensemble and pearls that probably cost more than a month of Richard's salary. Even from a distance, Richard could see that she spoke with the calm of someone accustomed to crisis situations. "Mr. Fletcher?" Richard called from the door. James raised his head, surprised, and his tired face showed relief. "Mr. Mason, I was desperate. My wallet—" "It was found in my taxi," Richard said, handing over the object. "Everything is there, I checked." James took the wallet with visible gratitude, opening it to confirm the contents. "I don't know how to thank you. First buddy, now this." "How is the dog?" asked Richard, genuinely concerned. "He's in surgery," replied James. "Dr. Winters is the best veterinary surgeon in the city. Dr. Montgomery here helped me calm him while we waited for the ambulance. She's a doctor, though humans are her specialty." He smiled weakly at the woman beside him. "And Buddy was a gift from her to my wife." The older woman extended her hand to Richard. "Eleanor Montgomery. I'm James's mother-in-law. My daughter. Sarah is on duty at the hospital, couldn't leave, so I came to give support." She studied Richard's face with growing curiosity. "You seem familiar to me somehow." Richard shook her hand politely, with no immediate recognition. "Richard Mason. I'm just the taxi driver who brought them." "Mason." Eleanor repeated the name slowly, as if trying to extract a distant memory. "From East Boston?" Richard frowned, studying the woman's face more carefully. "Yes, I was born and raised there." "East Boston High School?" asked Eleanor, leaning forward, her voice now filled with expectation. A flash of recognition crossed Richard's tired eyes. "Ellie?
Subscribe.
Eleanor? Montgomery from the class of 1976? My God, that was more than 47 years ago," she completed, her eyes now shining. "Richard Mason, I can't believe it. You were the boyfriend of Margaret," Richard confirmed, a genuine smile appearing on his face for the first time in that difficult day. Eleanor stood up, gesturing with excitement. "Margaret, how is she? Did you two finally get married after graduation as planned?" James watched the scene with growing interest, momentarily distracted from his concern for Buddy. Richard's smile faltered, and he felt the weight of the last few months collapse onto his shoulders. "Yes, We got married. In October. It will be 43 years. He hesitated, feeling his throat tighten. But she's not well, Ellie. Margaret has pancreatic cancer, advanced stage. The shock on Eleanor's face was immediate and genuine. Oh my God, Richard. Margaret with cancer. Her eyes filled with tears. And all these years without seeing each other. So much time, so much lost time that we could have been present in each other's lives. She held the old friend's hand tightly, her voice choked with emotion. She took a deep breath, assuming a more practical and determined tone. Richard, my daughter Sarah is an oncologist at the Boston Memorial Research Center. She's a brilliant doctor and has access to the most recent treatments and research there. I can't promise anything, but I want her to see Margaret's case. Eleanor took a gold-embossed card from her designer purse and wrote something on the back. This is her private office at Memorial. And this, she turned the card, is my personal number. Richard, call Sarah's office tomorrow morning. Say you're calling at my request. Ask to speak with her secretary and explain Margaret's situation. Bring all of Margaret's recent medical exams and reports. Sarah will analyze everything and see if there's any possibility of advanced treatment or a clinical trial for which she might be a candidate at Memorial. Richard looked at the card as if it were a map to an unattainable treasure. Eleanor, we can't afford a consultation there, much less a treatment. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Richard, don't worry about the cost of the first evaluation. Let's take one step at a time. The important thing now is for Sarah to see Margaret's exams. She's the right person to say if there's any chance of cutting-edge treatment at Memorial. Many research studies have grants that cover the costs if the patient clinically qualifies. She paused, with a serious look. I can't promise that there will be a study for which Margaret qualifies, Richard. The criteria are rigorous, but Sarah is the best to evaluate this. Please, do this for Margaret. Do this for our friendship. James, who had been observing the interaction, spoke softly. Mr. Mason, you saved our buddy today. The least we can do is ensure that Margaret receives the best possible medical evaluation. Please allow us to do this. At that moment, a veterinarian appeared at the door of the waiting room. His face was serious, but there was a small smile at the corners of his mouth. Mr. Fletcher, I have good news about Buddy. The surgery was successful. He lost a lot of blood, but we were able to stabilize him. With time and proper care, he will recover completely. The relief on James's face was palpable. He jumped up, shaking the veterinarian's hand vigorously. Doctor, I don't know how to thank you. How long until we can see him? He's still in recovery, but in about an hour you can have brief visits, replied the veterinarian, before withdrawing to attend. 2 other patients. James turned to Richard, his expression a mixture of gratitude and determination. Mr. Mason, I insist on paying for the damage to your taxi, the upholstery. Richard shook his head. Don't worry about that now. Knowing that the dog will survive is enough. He hesitated briefly, looking at the clock. I need to go. Margaret is waiting for her medications. Eleanor gently held his arm. Richard, call Sarah's office tomorrow morning. I'll let the receptionist know that you'll be calling. Bring all of Margaret's recent exams and medical reports. I can't promise anything, but if there's a chance, she qualifies for the study. Richard nodded, feeling something he hadn't experienced in months, a small thread of hope. Thank you, Ellie. After so many years, it's almost as if some things were meant to happen, Eleanor completed with a gentle smile. The look on James's face showed that he had caught something in Richard's voice, a deep concern, perhaps even contained desperation. He nodded, respecting the urgency. Thank you again, Mr. Mason, for everything. Another day we'll settle up, Richard said simply, and with that he left, carrying the card that Eleanor had given him as if it were much more precious than any fare payment. It was potentially the first step to helping Margaret.
Subscribe.
Later that night, after Richard got home and told Margaret about everything, the accident with the dog, the unexpected encounter with Eleanor after so many years, and the incredible possibility of a consultation with her daughter, Dr. Sarah Fletcher, a renowned oncologist at Boston Memorial who could evaluate Margaret's case to see if there was any advanced treatment option at her hospital, the two sat on the back porch. Margaret was still processing the news, her face a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. The sky was clear, and the stars were beginning to appear one by one in the dark mantle of night. Margaret held in her hands the elegant card from the Boston Memorial Research Center, gently running her fingers over the embossed golden logo. "I can't believe it, Richard. Ellie, after all these years. And her daughter is an oncologist at Boston Memorial, the hospital where Dr. Phillips said there might be treatments, but they were impossible for us. And she's going to look at my exams?" Dr. Phillips mentioned experimental treatments at research hospitals, but said the waiting list was endless for public system patients and the cost. "And now because of a dog you helped? Maybe there's a chance." Richard took her hand, their fingers intertwined over the arm of the chair, as they had done thousands of times over more than 4 decades together. "It's funny," Margaret said, softly, her voice laden with emotion. "I spent so much time angry at cancer, asking why this happened to me. Why now?" "I know, dear," Richard murmured, gently squeezing her hand. "But if I hadn't gotten worse in the last few weeks, if Dr. Phillips hadn't changed my medication to one so expensive," she continued, "you wouldn't be working on your day off, and if you weren't on that specific street, at that exact moment, I wouldn't have seen Buddy get hit," completed Richard. "And we wouldn't have found Eleanor again or met Sarah," Margaret concluded, squeezing her husband's hand. "And I probably wouldn't have this chance now." Richard felt a tear roll down his wrinkled cheek. He wasn't a man given to philosophies or sentimentalities. A hard life as a taxi driver in Boston had taught him to be practical, straightforward. But at that moment, under the starry sky, with Margaret's warm hand in his and the hope of a treatment that had previously seemed impossible, he allowed himself to believe what Margaret always said. "Maybe you're right," he murmured. "Maybe there are no coincidences." Margaret smiled, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. "Sometimes, the smallest gesture of kindness can create waves that reach shores we never imagined existed." 3 months later, Richard parked his taxi in front of the old house in the Dorchester neighborhood that he and Margaret had bought in their early years of marriage. The house needed paint and the garden was a little neglected, but it was still home. He picked up the grocery bags from the passenger seat and climbed the porch steps, feeling less pain in his knees than he had in years. When he opened the door, he was greeted by the sound of female laughter coming from the kitchen. He followed the sound, passing through the living room where the old family photographs now shared space with new ones. A recent photo of Margaret, with Eleanor in the garden of the Boston Memorial Research Center. Another of Margaret with Dr. Sarah Fletcher after a consultation, and a third, the most recent, showing Margaret petting Buddy during a visit from James to their house while the fully recovered dog tried to lick her face. In the kitchen, Margaret was sitting at the table, a colorful silk scarf covering her head, where her hair was beginning to grow back in small tufts. Her face was still thin, but there was color in her cheeks and her eyes were shining with something that Richard was afraid to name: hope. Eleanor was by her side, the two leaning over an old photo album, laughing about some shared memory from their youth. "Richard!" exclaimed Margaret, raising her face to receive her husband's kiss. "Eleanor was showing me the prom photos. Can you believe she kept them all these decades?" Richard put the groceries on the counter and joined the women at the table. "I believe it. Some people know how to value what's important." He exchanged a meaningful look with Eleanor, who smiled in response. Dr. Fletcher's experimental treatment was working. It wasn't a cure, they were realistic enough to know that, but Margaret had been accepted into the clinical trial after a thorough evaluation of her exams. Sarah, upon reviewing the reports and talking with Dr. Phillips, discovered that Margaret's specific type of cancer, the rare neuroendocrine, was exactly the focus of her cutting-edge research at Boston Memorial. Margaret qualified perfectly for the clinical study that Sarah was leading and was responding better than many other patients. Her latest tests showed a significant reduction in the tumor, and for the first time in months the couple allowed themselves to think beyond the next week, the next day. The renewed friendship with Eleanor had brought more than just access to the medical study. Eleanor had insisted on covering the costs that the research program didn't include, from the special nutritional supplements to small home renovations to make Margaret's life more comfortable during treatment. James had also become a frequent visitor, occasionally bringing Buddy, after noticing how the dog seemed to have a therapeutic effect on Margaret. "Animals can sense who needs them," he had commented once, observing how the dog, now fully recovered, always lay patiently beside Margaret's chair. Initially, Richard had resisted so much generosity, his pride wounded by the need for help, but Eleanor, with the wisdom of someone who had lived a lot, had put him in his place. "It's not charity, Richard. It's recovered friendship. It's what Margaret would have done for me if our positions were reversed. It's what she always did for everyone during school." As night fell completely over Boston, Richard Mason, a taxi driver for 47 years, thought about how a simple act, stopping to help an injured dog and then returning a lost wallet, had triggered a series of events that now gave him something that no money could buy: more time with the love of his life and the chance to see her receive the medical treatment she needed. And that, Richard realized, watching the stars emerge in the sky while Margaret rested her head on his shoulder, was the true miracle. Not the money or resources they now had access to, but the fact that, in a world where so many people pass by each other without really seeing, some still stop to help. And when they do, they sometimes discover unexpected connections that can change everything. Richard's story invites us to reflect. Why help strangers? Why risk our time and comfort for someone we will never see again? It reminds us that, in an interconnected universe like ours, no act of kindness is truly small or insignificant. Each gesture, each compassionate choice can create effects that extend far beyond the moment, touching lives we didn't even know existed, perhaps even saving the one we love most.